Something that I had no idea about was that improving your mindset and being able to support your emotions and the grief of what you're going through during infertility can actually improve your success outcomes. And I found this mind-blowing. Welcome to the In Your Element Fertility Podcast. I'm Jennifer Edmonds. I'm a yoga teacher, Pilates instructor, meditation and breathwork coach. And for the last 15 years, I've been helping women on their journeys to motherhood and beyond. This is the podcast that blends both science and spirit with everything you need to know as you navigate your fertility journey. If you're looking for a way to support your physical health, your mental health, reduce anxiety, and reclaim some joy back into your life to make the process of trying to conceive feel easier, then you've come to the right place. I'll show you how to apply the latest scientific research along with your energy and mindset to provide you with all the tools you need as you're trying to conceive. This is the In Your Element Fertility Podcast. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the In Your Element Fertility Podcast. And my guest today is the amazing Lea Nicole from True Fertility. Lea and I met on Instagram earlier this year, and she is a fellow IVF mama, a fertility coach, a therapist. She's also got a master's degree in psychology, so she is very experienced in both the practical as well as the personal side of infertility and IVF. But what drew me to her was how much fun she tries to make a lot of her content. And obviously we work in a really serious space where a lot of the subject matter is very heavy, but she is able to bring this beautiful sense of light to what she does. And I really resonated with that, and I think you will too. So on this episode, we're going to speak about all of the ways in which your mindset can support your fertility and ways in which having a better mindset and being able to support your emotions and the grief of what you're going through can actually improve your success outcomes as well, which I found mind-blowing. This is a conversation you won't want to miss. So let's get started. Here is Lea. Lea, welcome. I'm so excited to have you here on the podcast. Thank you for joining us. And how are you doing today?
Thank you so much for having me, Jen. I'm super excited to be here. I am a big fan of your work and all that you do. So again, truly honored to be here today.
Thank you. That's so sweet of you to say. We are going to jump into all of the important topics that we have planned. But before we get into those, can you tell us a little about you and the work that you do and how you came to work in this space?
Yeah, of course. Where to start? I've always actually been interested in psychology my whole life. And interesting enough, I, decided that's definitely the field that I wanted to go into, helping others. And because I really had it in my mind that I wanted to have kids, I actually started down the career path initially as a school psychologist. And this was before I had an idea that fertility would be any sort of a challenge for me. I wanted to be able to be home in the summer with my future kids and all of that good stuff. So I was in that field for a while. Fertility challenges struck. They struck pretty hard when I was about 30. And it took me a long path, both when I was single, trying to do egg freezing, unsuccessfully, I may add. And then, eventually finding my partner, my husband, and trying to have a child with a partner, right? And eventually, going through the IVF process a few times and also on the way, having things that you don't think that are going to happen, like a miscarriage. You go to IVF and you think everything's going to work out completely fine, get so excited, and then things happen, life happens. And going through the miscarriage for me was the hardest thing I'd ever been through. And despite my training in psychology and counseling, nothing hit me or prepared me for it. And it was there that I really started to use a lot of the tools and techniques that I had been trying to use with others on myself, and also seek out that support that I felt was really needed at that time in my life. And it was kind of just like a whole transformation that I had to go through. And it wasn't all, sunshine and rainbows. There were definitely hard days. again, I eventually was successful with the IVF process, and I do now have a 10-month-old baby. So that's great. However, because it had such a huge impact on my life, I decided to make this change in my career path and focus really instead of, going down the path of working with, children or things related to that aspect, to refocus my training and energies to supporting other women who are also going through a fertility challenge, because I know how hard it is. And I've learned so much in this process, and also learning from other people as well, like yourself.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'm so sorry to hear about your loss as well. Nothing prepares you for this. And,
I appreciate that.
What are the stats, the 1 in 4 that we all get told miscarriages happen? You don't even know this before it happens to you. And not that makes it any easier in any way, but it is life-changing when it does. How can we get the emotional support that we need throughout fertility challenges? I'm not sure about the clinic that you visited, but I found that, yes, my clinic offered mental health sessions and support and therapy, but it just felt very clinical. It didn't really encompass the breadth of what I was going through. And I really did have to go and find further outside support. So what do you feel that it is we need when we are struggling with fertility?
That's a really good question. And I think something that when we enter this space and this challenge in our lives, it's not something we actively think about on the forefront. We go in and we kind of tend to think, okay, I'm just going to get this medical procedure and everything's going to be fine. You're unaware of what you're facing emotionally during this time. And so I think that's a really great point. And again, the doctor, and my experience as well, is that, the clinics, while they're great, they often really don't shed light on, again, how emotionally challenging this process is. They just keep it, again, focused on the medical aspect. And it isn't until maybe somebody has some sort of very obvious breakdown that they tend to refer to the counselor. At least that has been my experience when speaking with others, other women who have gone through this. So I really think the first place that is great to look for support is starting just kind of with your inner circle. And I think taking a hard look at that and saying, who do I feel safe sharing my current story with and where I'm at? And if there is somebody in your life like that, lean into that and let them know. Maybe like if you're comfortable sharing where you're at with that one person, let that person be there for you during this hard time in your life. And it may not be, again, everyone. You also have to do the opposite too and say like, who maybe in my circle right now is not going to be the most emotionally healthy for me to be around during this trying time. And it's not like you're trying to be a bitch, right? You're just trying to maybe, identify who is going to help you right now and who may take away right now your energy and your, feeling of that safety net that you need around you. And it's not forever, it's temporary, right? This is a chapter of our lives. I know when you're in it, it doesn't feel like it. But starting with that inner circle. And I think I want to take it a step further aside from just thinking of who you can talk to, because we have a lot of people in our life that play a lot of different roles. And I think it's important to even really actively sit down and think about who can help me with what on this journey. Who is my friend that I want to talk to, right? As we talked about before. Who is somebody that I can lean on for more practical support? Like if I need somebody to help me order medication or pick up something from the pharmacy or drive me somewhere or accompany me, those types of things. And then also, who can I escape this with? Like, who can I escape with? Who can I just say screw this, I don't want to think about this anymore? And who can I have a great time with friend-wise? I think that's also really important too. Also want to think about who you can lean on for maybe advice, That's also something that's important when you're on this journey. And if there's not anyone in your inner circle for that aspect, that's when you may want to, or for any of those aspects, you may want to then step a little bit further out. Yeah.
That's a really comprehensive, awesome answer. Thank you. All of the things that you're mentioning, finding the support person and maybe finding someone else that you can escape with. As a psychologist, do you find that women tend to rely on their partner for a lot of these things? And is that helpful, or is it sometimes not really that helpful?
Yeah, that's another really great question, because I didn't even mention that in my first answer. But your partner, first of all, obviously can help you with all of those things. And it just depends. Every person's relationship is different. Maybe they really, again, they value their time with their partner, but they still need somebody to escape with, right? And just kind of forget about, the world with in a way. But yes, your partner can help you with all of these things. And actually, when we go through something as challenging as fertility challenges, it can actually, I know it doesn't feel like it in the moment, but it can actually make your relationship stronger. Couples who have gone through a fertility challenge together, the research shows that they're actually end up having stronger marriages and less divorce than couples who have children. So I think it is also something to, look at in a positive way if you can, if you can work through this together. But I think sometimes the challenge there is that, first off, just because you may be experiencing the same event, you may experience it different and deal with it different. And sometimes, when we're looking at our partner and maybe something is really stressful for us and we're feeling really worried about it, and we're not seeing that worry on them, we start to think, we assume maybe that this isn't a big deal for them or that it's not important. And we have to remember that everyone deals with events in their life or stressors in their life differently, and it doesn't mean that they don't care. And that's a really hard one to wrap your mind around. But it's really important, because I think that, again, that leads to a disconnect. And then you start talking less and less because you feel like that person doesn't understand where you're coming from. And this is really the time in which, if anything, you want to talk more to your partner and to share what's on your mind and what's bothering you, and hope to get that support at home.
I don't know how much more a relationship could take, when you talk about pregnancy loss and child loss and rounds of IVF and years of infertility. I mean, if you can survive that within your relationship, I feel like these days, my husband and I have a disagreement about something and it's over in 2 minutes. Things don't seem as difficult.
That's so true.
A great point there. So you went through several rounds of IVF and then it finally worked. What do you think it was about that cycle that perhaps was different? And I know everyone's always looking for the magic pill or the one thing that they can do that will change things and make a big difference. But you speak so much about how you changed your approach and the way that you supported yourself and your mindset. So what do you think that perhaps contributed to that round being successful?
Well, first off, I don't want to take any credit away from my amazing doctor. She did do a great job in taking a look at my last transfer and seeing what possibly could be preventing success, and kind of did more diagnostic work. So, that was also, I'm sure, extremely helpful. But aside from that, I do really feel like, I guess I also want to give a little more background there. I was found out to have adenomyosis. And so it's very similar to endometriosis. It's related. It's not the same condition. But the treatment for it is very similar to endometriosis, in which they give you this hormone or this drug, I believe, called Lupron. And I take that, you have to take that for multiple months. And so although I didn't want a pause in treatment, it was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. It really, again, that forced me to have that time and space to really look at where I was at mentally and to allow me to have that time without that pressure of the next round's coming, immediately. And just, again, look inside and see where I was at and look at what resources I could utilize. So some of those ones that I used, the first one I used, and I know this sounds very like, okay, we've heard this so many times and Oprah's even talked about it. So when it's on Oprah, it's so mainstream, but is gratitude journaling. That was one of the first things that I started. And it's a funny story because I started this on Christmas. Well, I'm trying to think of the year. I think it was 2021, I think. And I was having a really shitty Christmas. I was, again, on this medication. I actually wrote a self-written essay on this on like Medium because it was such a funny story. And it's called The Cupcake Meltdown, by the way. And I was so upset because I forgot to bring these Christmas cupcakes that I had bought from my family that day. I forgot them at home in all of the stress of getting everything together and, dealing with everything in my fertility world. I just forgot them. And it's not really a big deal, but I ended up having a complete meltdown. I was crying in the car. I couldn't go inside. All of these. Yeah. My dad came out and like helped me and was like talking to me, and I, was bawling. And again, it's such a small trigger that set me off. And I ended up going, to that Christmas event. I later went to my parents are separated or divorced. So I went to my mom's side of the event and talked with some other family members there. And then that was, again, the first day I started gratitude journaling. So I sat there and I was like, okay, yeah, I did not have the best Christmas. I had a fucking meltdown, but what were some benefits, right? What were some highlights of this day? Not benefits, but highlights. I was grateful that my dad was there for me to console me. I ended up having a nice talk with one of my aunts. I actually opened up to her about fertility challenges, and she shared that she actually went through that as well, which I had no idea. And I think last, I was just grateful for my big family. And that was just kind of the start of it. And every day I would write that for an entire year. And I just started to learn to appreciate the good that I had in my life that I had not really thought about before. I was just so focused on what wasn't working in my life. And that allowed me to really refocus on what was, despite the challenges. That was my first one. And there were plenty of other dominoes to fall.
Sure. I feel like we can all relate to that. I remember thinking, I'm managing this IVF process so well. I'm cruising along. Everything's fine. And I remember being at my acupuncturist one day and I'd got the time wrong, or they'd got the time wrong, and my acupuncturist wasn't there. And I lost it. Again, I was crying. I had sat on the floor. They had to bring me a bottle of water. It was ridiculous. And, when your response is so out of proportion to the actual situation that's going on, you realize that surface level things might look okay and you might be managing, but deep down there is so much that needs to change, so much that you can do to start supporting yourself.
Oh, definitely.
It is a minefield. One of the things that I found hardest to manage on my fertility journey, and I hear this from my students so often, is this idea of working around your expectations. Usually we think about IVF as this beacon of light at the end of the tunnel. You think, okay, well, it's not working. We've done some medicated cycles. We've done an IUI, whatever it might be. You think, but it's okay. I've got IVF. That will, and it doesn't often work. More often than not, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to people who are trying to manage these expectations and, your world just crumbles when your IVF cycle isn't successful? How do we manage this?
Yeah, I think that that's a really big one. Again, we kind of start off, as you mentioned, thinking this is the answer. Okay, I'm not getting pregnant. Well, that's what IVF is for, right? That's what these fertility doctors are for. You go to them and you're pregnant, right? Again, a lot of times it does work out, but I think when we get into it, again, it's not something that I think honestly, they do probably, in retrospect, they do probably share the statistics of it working with you. But again, you're so into this mindset of like, nope, it's going to work for me, and we do want to stay positive too. And I'll touch back on that in a second. But, again, really looking at the research and just being prepared and trying to accept what is the reality here, and just being prepared in that mindset to say like, okay, most people take 2 to 3 cycles in order to have a baby of IVF. That's pretty standard. That's pretty average. And again, if it works out on the first round, then yes, great. That's amazing. But let's not assume automatically that that's going to be the case, and just prepare ourselves for saying, okay, if I want to be successful with IVF, it's likely going to take probably 3 rounds. That's pretty standard, right? And I also, think that we need to consider I feel like that's one aspect, but there's also a lot of, we get excited and then we start to lose hope on the attrition rates of IVF. And what I'm talking about there is when, let's say you, retrieve 12 eggs, not all 12 of those eggs are going to make a beautiful blastocyst, which is the level that most doctors want to achieve in order to move forward with a transfer and eventually have a baby, right? And so we think, okay, we got 12 eggs. That means I'm having have 12 kids on ice, basically, right? And unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. So we have to manage the expectations and just have a clear idea of what to expect and just try to stay hopeful with that. So if we have 12, typically 80% of those fertilize. So then from there, out of that 80%, about 30 to 50% reach blastocyst level. And so with that, we started with 12, but we can really expect about possibly 3 embryos. And that's really before any of looking at the chromosome testing. So again, just trying to manage that and be realistic with the expectations as much as possible. And also knowing, again, that there are certain things that we can do to try to help boost our odds, but still, this is a reasonable expectation to expect.
That's true. And I think I went into IVF completely with my head in the sand. I had this idea that, that was just going to be the answer. And, I didn't even get to an egg collection that first round because my body just didn't have any eggs. And no one ever told me that was a possibility. So it is this hard place of not knowing what you don't know and then having to manage your expectations with all these other possibilities that crop up. So the best thing you can do is find people that have been through it, find people that work in this space for a living and really try and get the support that you need along the way. You mentioned one thing in that last area that you spoke about staying positive as you're trying to conceive. And this one is, I think, one that really irks me because there's a lot of toxic positivity around. And there's a whole idea of, if I'm not positive, I'm going to ruin my chances. And then at the same time, there's all of these people that think that manifesting a baby means that you have to be positive all the time, or you're going to bring low or bad energy around you and it's going to have a big effect on things. But we know this isn't true. And, people who have experienced trauma and abuse and are in war zones still conceive pregnancies. So it isn't always about you being perfect and positive. Can you talk a bit about why that isn't important and what we can do instead?
Yeah, so I agree with you. This is kind of a tricky one and one with some gray space in it because, as you mentioned, there is a difference between toxic positivity and positivity, right? And I kind of want to share a little bit more about what that means to me and kind of the differences that I'm seeing there. When I think about toxic positivity, I'm thinking about not honoring your feelings, kind of like something happened or, again, I'm dealing with fertility challenges. I had a miscarriage. My transfer didn't work. I've been trying for a year and I'm still not pregnant. All of those events are worthy of a host of emotions, right? And when we try to just push that aside and say, no, I need to just stay positive and not feel any of those things, that is to me the definition of toxic positivity, right? Like not honoring where you're at and allowing space to go through those emotions and to grieve any losses that you may have encountered. So again, I think first just starting there, allowing yourself to honor where you're at and what you're feeling, and to allow yourself to have that wave of emotions hit you and let it go through you. Because when we mute or try to minimize one part of our emotional spectrum, like sadness or fear or worry, all of the ones that we typically think of as negative emotions, although again, all emotions have a role for good in our lives. But when we try to minimize one side, we're also minimizing the other side of the spectrum, which is happiness and hope. So then we become this kind of numb state of, we enter this numb state of being and this zone where, again, we're kind of like on a robot mode, right? We're not really experiencing any lows, but we're also not experiencing any highs either, right? So we can't sweep it all under the rug. And the flip side, though, of that too is sometimes when we want to, honor where we're at, but if we kind of just, and give yourself that time and space to do that, but if you just kind of allow yourself to stay there for an extended period of time in which you're just kind of wallowing in grief for extended period of time, that's kind of when it's almost like quicksand. We can dip our toe in there for a while, and yes, that's normal. But when we start to stay there into that quicksand, we get deeper and deeper and deeper into that, grips of depression or anxiety or emotional unrest. And then we may find ourselves with a full-blown depression, experiencing that. And so this is where tools and support really come in, because there are people to help you in this dark chapter of life, right? This is when we really need to look at reaching out, to get professional help, to get support from others who have been there, to join support groups. I didn't say this earlier, but I also joined a support group. And that was one of the best things that I could have done for myself as well. I feel like even though infertility is a lot more in the media coverage nowadays, actually talking to somebody one-on-one, aside from just I see them on Instagram or on a chat, on a, Facebook group feels very anonymous still. Mm-hmm. Having that support group, and getting to actually talk with other women face to face and really listening to that story and having other people hear yours was really huge too.
Yeah. Definitely agree. It is that foundational support that makes all the difference. One of the most annoying things I think anyone can hear on this journey is this idea of stopping stress and letting that be the magic thing that helps you fall pregnant. We've all heard the lovely comments around just relaxing and going on holidays and all this garbage. But at the end of the day, stress is a huge factor with anyone who's going through fertility challenges. And it does have an impact on your body and your mental health and your life overall. Can you talk a little bit about how, from psychology perspective, stress affects your body and how this can have a flow-on effect to things like egg quality as well?
Yeah, and that is a great question because you're absolutely right. And I would never tell somebody to just relax, right? And that's going to get you pregnant. And we always, again, on social media joke about that because again, nobody wants to hear that, and that's not the correct advice. However, as you mentioned, stress does have ramifications on your body, and your mind-body connection is real. I first want to kind of start there because our body is complex and it does work all together. It's a whole system. So we often, I think, especially like in Western culture, forget that your mind is a part of your body and it affects it profoundly. It's really the control center of your entire body and your entire being. And it sends out messages via neurochemicals, neurotransmitters, to do all of the bodily functions, including fertility. So when we're overly stressed, when we're overly depressed, those can affect the signals to your bodily functioning and ultimately fertility. Specifically, I kind of want to talk about, again, egg quality, like you mentioned, and also kind of leading up to that again with the hormones, right? So the hormones that control your ovulation can be impacted by those super high stress levels because then cortisol spikes in your body. And when that's running at a higher amount than necessary, I mean, it's typical to have a stress function in which, again, we do something exciting, we, see something scary, your stress levels do spike, but they're supposed to go back down, right? And when we're in this world of a stressful event in our lives, like infertility, we have a prolonged stress response, and that's going to, again, impact the cortisol levels that your body is producing. And a good example of this that many women have experienced is that you may have a period that's off or late just purely because you had a stressful month, right? So when you think about the level of stress that you're piling on if you're going through a fertility journey over a year, that's definitely going to affect your body, right? That also can, as far as the stress, psychological stress can also impact your egg quality, your ovaries, your follicles, and the egg itself. Because the cortisol, as I mentioned earlier, also reduces your estrogen production. And that specifically is what can reduce the quality of your eggs. It can also halt the maturation process of your eggs and even lead to some cell death. So it is, but the good thing about this is you can turn the ship around. This isn't an end-all be-all. There are ways in which, again, not just saying relax, but there's active ways that you can use mind-body interventions, specifically on this, to really help reset your stress levels in your body and reduce all of those functions that have gone haywire.
That is such a great way of explaining it. And I always try to remind my students, when it comes to this topic of stress, that stress is not an emotion. It's not something that you're feeling in the same way you feel sadness or anger or joy. It is a physiological response that your body has. And when you understand that difference, we can't necessarily help the way that we feel. Emotions are just there, and that's wonderful and beautiful. But stress, because it's not an emotion, it doesn't have to be there all the time in the way that we perhaps think it is. So what are some of the ways that you would recommend people can start reducing the amount of stress hormones being produced by their body? What are some things that we can do daily, weekly in particular?
Yeah, definitely. You're absolutely right. There are plenty. The good thing is, as I mentioned before, there are plenty of things that we can do to reduce the stress hormones. One of those, I think the first place to start with that, and for me, even too, this is something that I had to practice and get better at. It's just even knowing when we are feeling overwhelmed and stressed. I think sometimes when we're in this state for so long, you don't even realize that it's happening. I had one time a very stressful position and a very demanding boss. I know this isn't necessarily fertility related, but I feel like it's a great example of a major shift that I had. And after I left that job, it was like, it took me a good month. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, I actually feel like my body feels different. And it was just like my shoulders were not tense. I didn't even realize how tense I had become. So I think, again, just really tuning in to your body and listening to it and saying like, okay, like sometimes I'll go 100 miles a minute and I'll be like, okay, I got to get this done. And maybe you're in the midst of infertility and you're dealing with going through a cycle and you're trying to get medications done and scheduling this appointment. And I got to get to my acupuncturist and I got to do this and that and everything else. And just stopping and being like, wow, I'm really overwhelmed right now. And then we can look at applying some of the strategies. And some of the strategies that I think are really helpful are some of the mind-body ones that are going to do the best kind of reset for you would be a host of things. One of them being physical exercise. And I love to recommend to clients yoga for fertility, which is actually something that you specialize in, obviously. And I think that's a really, really great place to be. And you don't have to be flexible because I'm not. And you don't have to know yoga. You don't have to wear Lululemon to do it, right? And that is a great reset because it includes aspects of, meditation, body movement, and just you have to really focus on the movements and you'll naturally block out a lot of other clutter in your mind. So that is one of them. Again, I touched on earlier, doing gratitudes, but also doing journaling. Journaling as a whole, in my program, I kind of separate them as two different concepts and two different strategies. But journaling is a really great place to vent. There's sometimes a lot of pent-up anger or frustration, and that is the perfect place to take it out instead of maybe calling someone and telling them off. That is a great place to start, right? To just let it all out, right? And that can be really healing and also de-stressing, right? Because you're letting all of the stressors out on a separate medium instead of holding them in. And journaling work actually can significantly reduce symptoms of anxiety and depression. So even just writing about your general experience with any sort of significant events in your life, one being, again, going through the fertility journey, if that has significantly impacted you, write about it. Let it all out. Tell your story there, right? That's a great way to help reduce some stress. So those are a couple of ways, some that I particularly really, as a person, really am drawn to. I also think, though, it's important to know which ones are good for you because we're not all the same. Mm-hmm. I may like journaling, but my best friend hates it, right? So we need to have a variety of tools out there to know kind of which ones are going to be best suited for us and also which one you feel like doing for that moment or that stressor or whatever you're going through in that time and space.
So this idea of having a toolkit, which I absolutely love, being able to be aware of so many different strategies and little techniques, and then just being able to pull the ones that you need, the time that you need them. Mm-hmm. My last question for you, Lea, is around social media. And,
Sure.
when I was going through IVF, it was many years ago, and there was no one on Instagram injecting themselves and putting that publicly out into the world. So I think in some ways social media is an absolute blessing when it comes to the infertility space, because there is so much awareness and so much support now compared to 5, 10 years ago. But at the same time, it can be awful. You're probably following a whole bunch of people you went to school with or studied with, and they're building their families and having their third pregnancies announced. And so what advice do you give to people that are trying to navigate this journey and social media, which, we can't always escape?
Boundaries. So boundaries, this in essence means really just putting some protections in place for yourself. So if and again, there's no shame in this, that your fertility struggle has put you in a fragile state. It sure did for me. I mean, it did for, again, most women that go through this or people who go through this. So if we need to make sure that we're protecting ourselves in this fragile state. So if you need to take a break from things that are triggering for you in this fragile time in your life, that's okay. So if one of those things is social media, again, that's okay to take a break. Nobody needs to know where you're at 24/7. You're not required to let the entire world know, give them an update for what you did every day of the week. And vice versa, you don't really, thinking about does seeing all of these people's feeds or the information that people are sharing, the pictures that they're sharing, does that bring me happiness after I look at that? Or does it bring me down? And just taking a step back and answering that for yourself. And if it does bring you down, then again, it's okay to take a break. You don't have to delete your accounts if you don't want to make it like a big deal, because sometimes people are like, wait, where did you go? Oh my God, you deleted your Facebook account. But yeah, you can just don't be on it for a little bit, right? Just delete the app from your phone. You can also unfollow people. And even on Facebook, they're not made known. It's not made known to them that you have decided to unfollow them. That doesn't mean you're unfriending them. It just means you're not going to be seeing their information or their feed. And there's even, I believe on Instagram, selections say see less of this type of post. So I would encourage you, if you're going to stay on, to at least look at those settings and mute those people, right? So again, whatever it is that that you can predict is going to be like a gut punch for you, we want to limit that as much as possible, because again, you're in this fragile state. You do need to work on doing the best you can to just get through the day, right? And we don't need anything else bringing you down right now. Your main job right now is just to take care of you. And, and if you need to take a break from social media, so be it, right?
Lea, thank you for sharing your journey and your knowledge and expertise with us so generously. I really appreciate it. If people would like to learn more about you and the work that you do and the ways in which you can support those going through fertility challenges, what is the best way to get in contact?
Yeah, so my most active social is, as I just talked about, don't get on social. My most active social is at True Fertility. So TRU Fertility. My last name's Trujillo. So that's where that comes from. You can also look at my website. It's www.leanicolecoaching.com. I do provide at this point in time one-to-one support for women, going through a fertility journey.
And I will link all of those in the show notes. Lea, thank you again for your time. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to connecting with you again soon. Thank you.
Yes, you as well, Jen. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. If you loved what you heard, be sure to share it with me by leaving a review so I can keep all this information coming your way. If you aren't already following me on social media, check the links below in the show notes to join me for more daily tips to support your fertility journey. And don't forget to visit my website to learn more about how the beautiful practices of yoga, meditation, and breathwork can support you as you're trying to conceive. Until next time, sending you all my love. The most common thing I hear from students who are on their fertility journey is that the stress of trying to conceive has taken over their life. Your days end up being filled with endless appointments, navigating pregnancy announcements. You're trying to eat right, take all your supplements, and it is all you think about from the moment you wake up. I designed the Element Fertility Yoga course to support your body, your mind, and your mental health in 3 important ways: to synchronize your hormones, increase circulation and blood flow, and to help regulate your nervous system. But on top of this, the greatest gift that you can give yourself throughout this journey is a sense of peace, to help you calm your mind and just make this process feel easier. Every single one of my students tell me that this is the first thing they notice after starting a yoga, meditation, and breathwork practice. But on top of this, you have the amazing benefit of actually supporting and increasing your fertility. Studies have shown that those participating in Mind-Body programs as they're trying to conceive have success rates 3 times greater than those who don't. The course I've designed walks you through natural conception as well as fertility treatments and IVF cycles. And the best part is you can work through it at your own pace in the comfort of your home. The practices start from just 10 minutes per day. To learn more, visit elementpilatesyoga.com or see the link in the show notes.